The first time I held her, she was shaking. It was late. My apartment windows were cracked open, and the city noise drifted in soft and far away. She was sitting on the edge of my bed, still in her jeans, staring at nothing. I remember touching her wrist first, just to see if she would pull away. She didn't. When I brushed her hair back from her face, she closed her eyes like she hadn't been touched gently in a long time. That's what I noticed. Not desire. Not heat. Just relief. I told myself I was helping her forget. That's what I called it. Her sister, my wife, had finalized the divorce 3 months earlier. 6 years of marriage reduced to 2 signatures and a quiet courtroom in downtown Chicago. No yelling. No drama. Just a tired kind of ending. We both knew it was over long before the judge did. After that, Sundays felt hollow. I kept the apartment. She kept most of the furniture. The silence was the hardest part. I would come home from work, loosen my tie, and just stand in the kitchen staring at nothing. I was 38 and suddenly felt older than that. Her sister, Leah, started coming around more after the divorce. At first it was practical things. Picking up mail that still came in her sister's name. Dropping off a box of old photos. We were careful at the beginning. Polite. Distant. Leah had always been the quieter one. 5 years younger than her sister. Softer voice. Softer presence. She worked in event marketing for a hotel chain downtown. Always dressed sharp, always composed. At least on the outside. The night she ended up on my bed, she had just signed her own divorce papers. I didn't even know her marriage was that bad. She never talked about it. But she showed up at my door with red eyes and said she didn't want to be alone. I should have said no. Instead, I let her in. We sat on the couch at first. She talked about how he had been distant for years. How she kept trying to be enough. Prettier. Quieter. Easier. She said that word a few times. Easier. I remember telling her she didn't have to try so hard with me. When she leaned into me, it felt natural. Familiar. Wrong, but natural. I told myself we were 2 lonely people finding comfort. I told myself it wasn't betrayal anymore because the marriage was over. That's how it began. But that isn't the moment that changed everything. The moment that changed everything happened 2 weeks later, in a hotel ballroom on a Tuesday afternoon. I had taken a consulting contract with a hospitality group after the divorce. It kept me busy. Long hours, spreadsheets, inventory audits. The kind of work that doesn't ask about your feelings. I walked into the ballroom to check a lighting setup and saw Leah standing near the stage with 2 men from corporate. One of them was laughing. He said she was good, loud enough for half the room to hear, but then added that the industry moved fast. That fresh energy wins. Fresh energy. He looked her up and down when he said it. Not subtle. Leah nodded like she was used to it. Like she had heard versions of that sentence before. She kept her smile in place. Professional. Tight. I stood near the back, clipboard in hand, and watched her swallow whatever she wanted to say. That was the first time I really saw her. Not as my ex-wife's sister. Not as the woman in my bed. Not as comfort on a lonely night. I saw the way her fingers trembled slightly when she adjusted the stage notes. I saw how she kept her shoulders straight even as that man kept talking about new blood and keeping things young. She was 34. Later, when the meeting ended, I found her alone near the service hallway. She was staring at her phone but not typing anything. I asked if she was okay. She gave the same answer she had given me that first night. That she was fine. It sounded rehearsed. I told her, no offense, but she didn't look fine. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Not amused. Just tired. She said it was just business. That I knew how it was. I did know. I had seen it before. Women being told they were too much. Or not enough. Too emotional. Not dynamic. Too old for rooms that worshipped youth but relied on experience. But watching it happen to her did something sharp inside my chest. I said he was out of line. She shrugged. Said he signed her checks. There it was. Practical. Controlled. Accepting what she thought she had to accept. I surprised myself in that moment. I am not usually the man who makes scenes. I prefer quiet exits. Calculated conversations. Instead, I walked back into the ballroom and asked to speak with him privately. I kept my voice even. I told him that if he wanted the event executed flawlessly, he might want to respect the person actually running it. I reminded him that numbers and performance reviews were measurable, and Leah's were strong. I said it calmly, professionally. But I meant every word. He looked annoyed. Slightly amused. But he nodded. When I stepped back into a hallway, Leah was staring at me like she didn't recognize me. She said I didn't have to do that. I told her I knew. There was a pause. The kind that stretches longer than it should. She added softly that she was used to handling it. I said I didn't think she should have to. Something shifted in her expression then. Not attraction. Not yet. Something quieter. Like someone had turned a small light back on. We didn't touch in that hallway. We didn't kiss. We didn't even stand close. But when she left that evening, she squeezed my hand. Just once. Quick. That touch felt different from the ones in my bedroom. That night, when she came over again, the air between us wasn't just about forgetting. It wasn't just about skin and warmth, and trying not to think about what we had both lost. As she lay beside me, her fingers tracing lazy circles on my chest, she asked why I did it. I could have said because I cared about her. I could have said because he was wrong. Instead, I said the truth that scared me. That she deserved better than being talked to like that. She was quiet for a long time after that. And lying there, staring at the ceiling, I realized something uncomfortable. I had been using her body to fill the silence in my life. But somewhere between that hallway and this bed, she had stopped being an escape. She had become someone I didn't want to hurt. And for the first time since my divorce, I understood that if I wasn't careful, I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. 2 nights after that hallway conversation, she came over again. But this time she didn't head straight to my bedroom. She stood in the kitchen, heels still on, coat still buttoned, like she wasn't sure why she had come. I was leaning against the counter pretending to scroll through emails I wasn't reading. She said again that I didn't have to say anything to him. I poured her a glass of water instead of wine. It felt safer. I told her I knew. That I wanted to. She nodded slowly, studying me. The air felt different than it had before. Less desperate. More careful. She added that she wasn't some fragile thing. Not defensive. Just clear. I said I didn't think she was. That seemed to surprise her. We moved to the couch, but we sat on opposite ends at first. There was space between us. Real space. The kind that forces conversation instead of replacing it. After a while she said she kept replaying it. The way he looked at her. Like she should be grateful she was still in the room. Her voice didn't crack. She just stared at the floor. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. I knew that look. I'd seen it on her sister's face once or twice during our marriage. The slow erosion of confidence. I asked why she stayed. She smiled, small and tired. Said it was because she worked too hard to get here. That she was good at what she did. That she shouldn't have to disappear just because she wasn't 25 anymore. I told her she wasn't invisible. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. She said I didn't have to say things like that. I said I wasn't saying it to be nice. Silence again. Not awkward. Just honest. She shifted closer. Not much. Just enough that our knees brushed. I felt the contact and didn't move away. She asked quietly why I cared. It wasn't flirtation. It was real. I thought about lying. Saying something light. But I was tired of pretending. I told her it was because I knew what it felt like to be replaced. To sit in a room and realize you're not what someone wants anymore. Her eyes softened. She said carefully that my sister never told her much. I said she didn't have to. We both knew the story without details. That was the first time we talked about the divorce without hiding behind humor or distraction. I told her how quiet the apartment felt. How I had started eating dinner standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt wrong. How I sometimes reached for a second coffee mug in the morning without thinking. She listened without interrupting. Just nodded. She admitted about her own marriage that she tried everything. New dresses. New hair. Being less opinionated. More agreeable. She gave a short laugh. Said it was exhausting trying to shrink yourself. I said she shouldn't have to shrink. She replied gently that I didn't fight harder. Not accusing. Just observing. She was right. I hadn't. At some point I had simply gone quiet. I said I didn't know how. We sat with that for a minute. Then she surprised me. She said maybe we were both a little guilty. Of staying too long. Of not asking for what we needed. There it was. The moment neither of us expected, where we realized we shared something. We weren't just two lonely people filling space anymore. We were two people who had lost parts of themselves trying to keep someone else happy. Time slipped by without us noticing. The city outside got quieter. The clock on the stove blinked 11:47 before I realized how late it was. She tucked her legs under her, turning toward me fully now. She said she didn't want this to just be, and then hesitated. I offered the word comfort. She nodded. She said she didn't want to wake up one day and realize she was just convenient. The words landed heavier than she probably meant them to. I swallowed. Because if I was honest, that's how it had started. I said carefully that she wasn't convenient. That she was steady. Sharp. That she ran rooms full of people who didn't deserve her. Her mouth curved slightly. She said that sounded almost like a compliment. I told her it was. Her foot brushed mine under the coffee table. This time neither of us pretended it was accidental. She said she didn't want to mess this up. I pointed out we hadn't defined what this was yet. She said exactly. That made me laugh quietly. After a while, she stood and walked to the window. I followed. We stood side by side, close enough that our shoulders touched. She admitted she didn't usually let people see her when she wasn't composed. I said I'd seen her composed. That I liked this version better. She looked up at me then. Not bold. Not seductive. Just open. And when she leaned in, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't fueled by loneliness or anger or trying to drown something out. It was slow. Her hand rested against my chest like she was testing whether I was real. I let my fingers slide along her waist, careful, giving her room to step back. She didn't. The kiss was quiet. Almost unsure at first. We both paused halfway through like we were checking in without words. It felt different from the earlier nights. Less urgent. More intentional. When we finally pulled apart, she stayed close, forehead resting lightly against mine. She whispered that she didn't know what we were doing. I said I didn't either. She said she didn't feel used though. The honesty in that sentence nearly undid me. I took her hand then, interlacing our fingers instead of pulling her toward the bedroom right away. It felt important somehow. To slow down. I said we shouldn't pretend this was simple. That she was my ex-wife's sister. That alone was complicated. She nodded. I added that we were both fresh out of something that hurt. Another nod. But she added softly that we weren't broken. I agreed. We weren't. We didn't rush to the bedroom that night. We talked until after midnight. About work. About childhood. About small things like how she still hated folding fitted sheets, and how I still couldn't keep plants alive. When she finally did follow me down the hallway, it wasn't about forgetting anymore. It was about choosing. And as she curled against me, her head resting on my shoulder, I felt something unfamiliar. Not just desire. Responsibility. I realized I didn't just want her warmth. I wanted her trust. And that scared me more than anything. 2 weeks later, we stopped pretending it was casual. It didn't happen in some dramatic way. There was no big talk. It was smaller than that. Quieter. She started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom. At first it was just there one morning, tucked beside mine like it had always belonged. I noticed it while shaving and stood there a little longer than I needed to. It felt ordinary. Domestic. Not reckless. By October, we had fallen into a rhythm. She'd text around 6 if she was staying late at the hotel. I'd reply with something simple. Just telling her to eat. Or not to let them push her around. She would send back a photo of her laptop and a tired face, no makeup, hair pulled back. Those were my favorite versions of her. Not polished. Not performing. Sometimes I'd meet her after work at a diner near the river. The place with the cracked red booths and coffee that tasted burn no matter what. We'd sit on the same side sometimes without planning to. Our legs touching under the table. It was slow. That surprised me. We had already crossed physical lines. We had already shared a bed. But this, the emotional part, moved carefully. Like both of us were afraid to step too hard and break it. After a month of this, I realized she was calling me first when something went wrong. One afternoon she showed up at my apartment without warning. She dropped her purse by the door and just stood there. She said they were restructuring. Again. I handed her a glass of water like I always did. She said they were bringing in a younger director. Fresh perspective. The phrase made my jaw tighten. She sank onto the couch. I sat beside her, close but not crowding. She said she could handle competition. That this wasn't what that was. I said I knew. Her hand found mine without looking. It felt automatic now. Easy. 6 months after that first coffee in my kitchen, we had developed small habits that felt bigger than they should. Sunday mornings meant grocery shopping together. She insisted on checking expiration dates. I insisted on buying flowers even when she said we didn't need them. We argued lightly about nothing. Which pasta sauce was better? Whether to watch a documentary or some mindless show. Sometimes we'd end up tangled on the couch halfway through a movie. Her legs draped over mine. My hand resting at her hip. The physical part was still there, still strong. But it didn't feel hungry the way it had at the beginning. It felt earned. The first time she stayed the entire weekend, she walked into my bedroom Friday night and paused. She asked if I ever thought about how strange this was. I said all the time. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking around like she was seeing it differently. She said this used to be her space too. Her sister's space. I sat beside her. I said I knew. There it was. The obstacle we had been carefully stepping around. Her sister. We hadn't told anyone. Not her. Not my friends. Not co-workers. It existed in this bubble between us. Safe but fragile. I asked if it made her uncomfortable. She thought for a moment. She said it made her aware of how easy it would be for people to assume the worst. They probably would. The truth was complicated. We hadn't planned it. We hadn't chased it. But from the outside, it would look messy. By December, the work crisis came. A major corporate client pulled funding 3 days before a large holiday event. Leah was responsible for delivering it. I was consulting on the operational side. The ballroom was chaos. Vendors arguing. Lighting misaligned. Staff panicking. She stood in the middle of it, calm in a way that impressed me every time. She told the team okay, that they would adjust. Smaller stage. Shift the bar left. Cut the ice sculpture. That they'd lean into intimacy. I watched her command that room. Clear voice. No apology. At one point she pulled me aside. She told me to give her the numbers straight. No softening. I did. We worked side by side for 14 hours. No flirting. No lingering touches. Just efficiency. When the doors opened and guests flooded in, the room looked intentional. Elegant even. Later that night, after the last table was cleared, she leaned back against the empty stage and let out a breath. She said I was steady. I said so was she. She looked at me like she was seeing something shift too. Respect had grown alongside attraction. It wasn't just chemistry anymore. It was partnership. But obstacles don't disappear just because you're doing well. A week later, her sister called her. I didn't hear the full conversation. I was in the kitchen pretending not to listen. Leah's voice was tight. She said no, that it wasn't like that. Then quieter, that it wasn't about her. When she hung up, she stood still for a long time. She said finally that her sister knew. My stomach dropped. Leah continued that she didn't ask directly. But she suspected. I asked how she sounded. Leah said not angry. Just hurt. That was worse. For the first time since we started this, I saw doubt flicker in her. She said maybe we rushed this. Maybe we should have waited longer. Or not let it happen at all. I moved closer but didn't touch her right away. I asked if she regretted it. She met my eyes. She said no. The answer was immediate. But she added that she didn't want to lose her sister either. There it was. The real stake. By January, whispers had started at work too. Nothing direct. Just glances. A few comments about how often we were in the same meetings. One afternoon, a junior manager joked about power couple. Leah's smile stayed polite. Mine didn't. We began discussing what it would mean if this became public. Reporting structures. HR. Potential transfers. It wasn't romantic. It was practical. Necessary. Still, every time we sat across from each other at my dining table with spreadsheets open, planning our next move like it was a business merger, I felt how much this mattered. One night, after a long conversation about policy and risk, she reached across the table and took my hand. She asked softly what scared her. I asked what. She said that she cared more about this than she planned to. I squeezed her fingers. I told her I stopped planning a while ago. She laughed quietly. We moved to the couch. The room was dim, just the lamp in the corner. She curled into me like she had done dozens of times before, but this time there was something heavier underneath. She said against my chest that this wasn't just comfort anymore. I said I knew. Her fingers traced slow lines over my shirt, thoughtful rather than urgent. She continued that if this fell apart, it wasn't just another bad choice. It was family. It was work. It was everything. I rested my chin against her hair. I said I didn't want to lose her. The words came out before I could weigh them. She went still. She whispered that sounded dangerous. I said probably. But neither of us moved away. As winter settled over the city, our lives had started to intertwine in ways that were hard to undo. Shared groceries. Shared calendars. Shared secrets. The line between temporary and permanent was getting thinner. And for the first time since the divorce, I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of losing her. It happened on a Thursday night in early March. The kind of night where everything feels one phone call away from falling apart. I was halfway through dinner when she called. I could hear noise behind her. Not music. Not conversation. Panic. She said the main speaker backed out. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. 2 hours before doors open. I asked where she was. She said ballroom C. I grabbed my jacket without thinking. When I walked in, the room felt charged. Staff moving too fast. Someone arguing about sound levels. Leah standing near the stage, phone pressed to her ear, posture straight like always. But her eyes gave her away. She hung up and saw me. She said immediately that she had options. That it wasn't ideal, but she could pivot. I told her I knew she could. She exhaled slowly. We worked side by side again, like we had in December. Calls made. Slides adjusted. Seating rearranged. I handled logistics while she rewrote half the evening in 20 minutes. She was sharp. Focused. Capable. At one point, when things finally settled, she leaned against the table and closed her eyes for just a second. I said quietly that she was allowed to be tired. She opened her eyes and gave me a look. Half amused. Half vulnerable. She said she didn't get to be tired. I told her she did with me. The event went smoothly. Better than expected. Guests applauded the replacement speaker like nothing had gone wrong. When the last car pulled away and the staff filtered out, we were alone in the empty ballroom. The lights were dimmed. Chairs stacked. The echo of the night still hanging in the air. She kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the stage. I sat beside her. For a minute neither of us spoke. Then she said it. She said she couldn't keep pretending this was casual. Her voice wasn't dramatic. Just steady. I said I knew. She looked down at her hands. She continued that her sister called again yesterday. Asked if she was seeing someone. That she didn't lie. My chest tightened. I asked what she said. She said she told her yes. Another pause. She said her sister asked if it was me. I swallowed and asked what happened next. She said she didn't answer. The quiet between us felt heavier than usual. She said this could get messy. For me. For her. For her sister. I replied that it already was. She turned toward me fully then. Close enough that I could see the faint lines at the corner of her eyes. Lines that corporate men pretended were flaws. I saw them as proof of life. She said she didn't want to hurt anyone. I said I didn't either. She said but she also didn't want to wake up a year from now and realize she walked away from something real because she was scared. That word stayed with me. Real. I felt something shift inside me. The last wall I had kept up, the one that told me to stay careful, to stay detached, finally cracked. I told her I was in love with her. It came out simple. No build-up. No performance. Her breath caught. Just slightly. She said I didn't have to say that because tonight was intense. I told her I wasn't saying it because of tonight. I let the rest of it sit there. No elaboration. Just truth. I continued that I didn't plan to fall in love with her. That it started wrong. Started messy. That I was lonely. She was hurting. But somewhere in the middle of grocery lists, and late-night calls and watching her run a room full of people, It stopped being about filling space. She was quiet, studying me like she was searching for doubt. I said softly there wasn't any. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. She whispered that this was reckless. I said probably. She said it could cost me. I said I knew. She said it could cost her. I said I knew that too. She let out a slow breath. She said she was in love with me too. The words were barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just sat there. The weight of it settling. Not fireworks. Not chaos. Relief. She leaned forward first, her forehead resting against mine the way it had months earlier in my apartment. But this time there was no uncertainty in it. She said this changed everything. I agreed that it did. She said we couldn't hide it anymore. I said no. We talked about the practical things right there on that empty stage. Reporting structures. HR. What it would mean to transfer accounts. The possibility that one of us might have to step back. She said firmly that she didn't want anyone thinking she slept her way into anything. I said they wouldn't. She said I couldn't promise that. I admitted no. But I said I could stand beside her. She looked at me then, like she was measuring whether I meant it. She said she wasn't asking me to sacrifice my career. I answered that I wasn't sacrificing. I was choosing. The word felt important. She stood up slowly. I followed. When she kissed me this time, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't about comfort. It was deliberate. Her hands firm at my waist. Mine steady at her back. There was heat, yes. But underneath it was certainty. After a moment, she pulled back slightly. She said we were going to have to tell them. I said I knew. She said HR first. I said of course. She smiled faintly. Even in this moment, she was thinking about policy. She murmured that she couldn't believe she was doing this. I said neither could I. We walked out of the ballroom together. Not touching. Just side by side. In the parking garage, she stopped near her car. She said quietly that if this ruined everything, she needed to know I wouldn't disappear. I stepped closer. I told her I wasn't disappearing. She searched my face one more time. Then she nodded. She said okay? That we should stop pretending then. And as she drove away, I stood there longer than I needed to. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't reacting to life. I was choosing it. We scheduled the HR meeting the following Monday. Neither of us slept much the night before. We sat across from each other at my dining table Sunday evening, laptops open, reviewing company policy like we were studying for an exam. Dating within the organization. Disclosure requirements. Conflict of interest language. She said, closing her laptop, that this felt clinical. I replied that it had to. That if we were going to do this, we'd do it clean. She nodded. That mattered to her. Integrity. Not giving anyone easy ammunition. The next morning, we walked into the office separately. That was deliberate. The HR conference room was small and overly bright. A glass wall on one side. A long table that felt colder than it needed to be. We sat side by side anyway. The HR director, Melissa, folded her hands calmly. She had probably seen everything at this point. She said gently that we were here to disclose a relationship. Leah answered before I could, saying yes. Her voice was steady. Professional. Melissa asked the expected questions. How long? Whether there had been any supervisory authority. Whether decisions had been influenced. Leah said firmly no. That we'd kept work separate. I backed her up. I explained my consulting role. How our reporting lines were structured. I suggested a transfer to eliminate even the appearance of conflict. Melissa took notes. She said we understood there may be adjustments. I replied that we did. Leah's hand rested lightly on the table between us. Not touching mine, but close enough that I could feel the presence of it. When we left the room, the hallway felt different. Louder. More eyes. It didn't take long. By Wednesday, whispers had started. Nothing direct. No one bold enough to say it to our faces. But you can feel when a room shifts. Conversations that stop when you walk in. Smiles that linger a second too long. I heard someone in the break area say something about her fast track. How that explained it. I kept walking. That afternoon, an anonymous email landed in Leah's inbox. She showed it to me without a word. Unprofessional. Predictable. Sad. No name. No signature. She stared at the screen for a long time. She said quietly that she knew this would happen. I replied that people get bored. That they need stories. She said, or maybe they were right. The words hit harder than the email. I said immediately that they weren't. She shook her head. She said, not angry but just tired, that I didn't know what it was like. Being the older woman. The one who should know better. I stepped closer. I told her she wasn't the older woman. That she was the best director in that building. She said that wasn't what they saw. I could see doubt creeping in. Not about us. About whether it was worth the noise. 2 days later, she called me from her office. She said maybe we should slow this down. At least publicly. I asked her what she meant by slow down. She said maybe less visible. Fewer lunches together. Fewer meetings side by side. It sounded like retreat. I asked carefully if she wanted to hide. She said she wanted to protect me. There it was. I told her I didn't need protection. She said I might not get a choice. The following week, a senior executive requested a review of recent promotions in her department. It was subtle. Framed as routine. It wasn't routine. Leah handled it head-on. She sent performance metrics. Documentation. Data that couldn't be argued with. But that night, at my apartment, she sat on the couch with her shoulders slumped. She said she was tired of being scrutinized. I sat beside her. I said then we should give them nothing to scrutinize. She looked at me. She asked if I wasn't angry. I admitted I was. But I said I wasn't ashamed. She studied me for a long moment. She said again that she didn't want this to cost me. I told her it wasn't costing me. It was clarifying things. She leaned into me slowly, resting her head against my shoulder. She whispered whether this was a mistake. I turned toward her. I asked if she regretted loving me. She said no. I said then it wasn't a mistake. The next month brought the proof moment neither of us planned. A large national client considered pulling their contract. The pitch meeting was high stakes. Leah had been sidelined from similar presentations before, quietly replaced by younger team members. This time, she asked to lead. There was resistance. Polite hesitation. She insisted. I wasn't directly involved in the presentation, but I helped her prep. Slides. Financial projections. Strategy angles. The day of the pitch, I watched from the back of the room. She stood at the front, composed and sharp. She didn't overcompensate. She didn't soften her voice. She just delivered. Confident. Clear. Unapologetic. When the client shook her hand at the end and said she was exactly who they needed, I felt something settle inside me. The contract was renewed. By the following week, the tone around the office shifted. Whispers quieted. Recognition replaced suspicion. One afternoon, the same junior manager who had joked about power a couple months earlier stopped by my desk. He said congratulations on the renewal. That she killed it. I replied that yes, she did. Leah earned that respect. Not because of me. Not because of us. Because she was good. That night, back at my apartment, she stood in the kitchen holding the renewal email. She said she didn't need me to save her. I said I knew. She said but she was glad I was there. I stepped closer. I told her I wasn't here to save her. That I was here to stand next to her. Her expression softened. She said we were still going to face things. I said I knew. She reached for my hand. She said but she wasn't walking away. I said neither was I. The gossip hadn't vanished completely. It probably never would. But something had changed. We weren't defending a secret anymore. We were defending a choice. And for the first time since the whispers started, she looked lighter. Not because people stopped talking. But because she stopped listening. We didn't move in together in some dramatic rush. It happened gradually. Her coat stayed in my closet more often than not. Then a second pair of shoes appeared by the door. Then one Sunday afternoon she said, almost casually, that it didn't make sense to keep paying for a place she barely slept in. We stood in my kitchen when she said it. Same kitchen where this whole thing had started feeling different months earlier. I asked if she was sure. She looked around the apartment. The half-dead plant near the window. The small dining table that had hosted our strategy talks and late-night confessions. She said she wasn't moving in because it was convenient. She was moving in because she wanted to. That mattered. 2 weeks later, we were carrying boxes up the stairs. Nothing expensive. Just books, framed photos, a few kitchen things she refused to part with. The first night everything was in place. We ordered takeout and sat on the floor because the couch was buried in pillows. She said this felt calm. I asked if that was good calm. She said settled calm. That was new for both of us. Daily life shifted in small ways. I woke up earlier because she liked quiet mornings. She started leaving notes on the counter when she had early meetings. Short things. About big presentations. Or reminding me not to forget to eat. We cooked together most nights. She chopped vegetables precisely. I handled the stove. Sometimes we talked about work. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. Comfortable silence became normal. At work, things stabilized too. After the client renewal, Leah's standing was solid. The executive who had requested the review now included her in higher-level planning sessions. I adjusted my consulting contract to remove myself from any projects directly tied to her department. It cost me a little influence, maybe some visibility. I didn't regret it. One evening in April, we attended a small industry dinner together. Not as a secret. Not as a rumor. Together. There were looks. There always would be. But they were quieter now. More curious than judgmental. At one point, a woman from corporate leaned toward Leah and said she looked happy. Leah glanced at me briefly before answering. She said she was? It wasn't defensive. It was simple. A month later, she invited me to dinner with her parents. That felt bigger than the HR meeting somehow. We drove out to a quiet neighborhood near the lake. Brick houses. Trimmed lawns. The kind of place where everyone notices new cars. Her mother opened the door and looked at me carefully. Not hostile. Just assessing. Her father shook my hand firmly. Dinner was polite at first. Safe topics. Work. Traffic. The weather. Then her mother asked gently if we were both sure about this. Leah answered before I could. She said yes. There was no hesitation. Her father studied us for a moment. He said we understood it wouldn't always be easy. I replied honestly that it hadn't been. Something in that answer seemed to settle him. On the drive home, Leah leaned her head against the window. She said that could have gone worse. I said it went fine. She smiled faintly. She said fine was good. Summer arrived slowly. By June, the apartment felt like ours instead of mine. Her books on the shelves. Our shared calendar on the fridge. 2 coffee mugs in the sink every morning. We argued sometimes. About small things. My habit of leaving lights on. Her tendency to answer emails at midnight. But the arguments ended quickly. Not because we avoided them. Because either of us wanted distance to linger. One Saturday morning, while she was still asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a small velvet box in front of me. I had bought it 3 days earlier and hadn't opened it since. It wasn't elaborate. Just simple. Clean. I wasn't nervous about asking. I was nervous about the weight of what it meant. She walked into the kitchen in one of my old shirts, hair messy, still half asleep. She said I was up early? I said yeah. She poured coffee and sat across from me. She asked immediately what was wrong. I said nothing was wrong. She narrowed her eyes slightly. I slid the box across the table. She stared at it. She asked quietly if this was what she thought it was. I said I hope so. She didn't open it right away. She looked at me first. She asked if this wasn't because of pressure. Not because we felt like we had to prove something. I said no. That it was because I woke up next to her, and it felt right. Because the hard parts didn't scare us off. Because I didn't want to build the rest of my life without her in it. She opened the box then. Her breath caught softly. Not dramatic. Just surprised. She said she didn't think she'd do this again. I said I knew. She asked if I was sure. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything. She closed the box and stood up, walking around the table toward me. She said yes. Just that. Yes. She wrapped her arms around me. Tight. Not a sweeping movie moment. Just 2 people in a quiet kitchen holding on. Later that afternoon, she called her sister. I stayed in the other room, giving her space. The conversation was long. Soft voices. A few pauses. When she came back, her eyes were red but calm. She said her sister needed time. I said that was fair. Leah said she told her she wanted her to be happy. I said that was fair too. We didn't need fireworks. We needed stability. And for the first time in a long time, that's exactly what we had. We didn't plan a big wedding. Neither of us wanted that. After everything, the whispers, the questions, the slow rebuilding, a spectacle felt wrong. We chose something smaller. Intentional. A late September afternoon. A quiet waterfront park just outside the city. The kind of place where the air smells faintly like lake water and cut grass. About 30 people came. Close friends. A few coworkers who had become something closer to family. Her parents. My brother. And her sister. That part mattered. When Leah told me her sister had agreed to come, I didn't ask questions. I just nodded. Some things needed space more than words. I stood near the edge of the dock before the ceremony started, hands in my pockets, watching guests gather. No tuxedo. Just a navy suit. Simple. I wasn't thinking about doubters. I was thinking about that first night in my apartment. About how messy and fragile it had felt. How unsure I had been of my own intentions. I wasn't that man anymore. When Leah walked toward me, the entire space seemed to quiet on its own. Her dress wasn't dramatic. Clean lines. Soft fabric that moved with the breeze. Her hair pulled back loosely. She didn't look younger or older. She looked sure. When she reached me, she smiled the same small smile she'd given me in that hallway months ago. The one that said she saw something steady. We stood facing each other as the officiant began. There were no long speeches. No exaggerated promises. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't read from paper. She said simply that she didn't expect this. Not like this. Not after everything. But that I stood next to her when it would have been easier to step back. That I never tried to shrink her. Never asked her to be quieter or softer. That I just stayed. Her voice wavered slightly at that last word. I cleared my throat when it was my turn. I admitted that I started this relationship wrong. That I was lonely. Careless with my own heart, and almost careless with hers. But somewhere in the middle of grocery lists and crisis calls and quiet Sunday mornings, I realized I didn't want comfort. I wanted partnership. That she wasn't just the person I loved. She was the person I respected. There was a quiet murmur from the guests. Not dramatic. Just moved. When we exchanged rings, it felt less like a leap and more like a continuation. We kissed briefly. Not to perform. Just because we could. Afterward, there was a small dinner at a nearby restaurant. Candlelight. Long tables. People talking in low voices. At one point, I stepped outside for air. Her sister joined me a minute later. We stood side by side, looking at the water. She said Leah looked happy. I said she was. She nodded slowly. She admitted she was angry at first. Not because of me. Because it made her question things. About her own marriage. About timing. I said I never meant to hurt her. She said she knew. She looked at me then, steady. She told me just to take care of her. I said I would. When I walked back inside, Leah was laughing at something her father had said. Her hand resting on the table, ring catching the light. I realized something then. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving ourselves right. People had assumed it wouldn't last. That it was rebound comfort. That it was complicated and therefore doomed. But complication doesn't mean fragile. Sometimes it just means real. Later that night, back in our apartment, she kicked off her shoes near the door and leaned against the wall. She said softly, almost like she was testing the word, that we were married. I echoed it. Married. She walked over and wrapped her arms around me. She asked if I knew what she was proud of. I asked what? She said that we didn't hide. Not from HR. Not from family. Not from each other. I nodded. I said we didn't take the easy path. She said no. We stood there in the quiet, still dressed from the evening, the apartment dim and familiar around us. Outside, traffic hummed the way it always did. Nothing about the world looked different. But everything felt settled. Not because we had defeated gossip. Not because we had convinced anyone. Because we had chosen each other in full view. And this time neither of us was shrinking. I used to think love was supposed to feel explosive. Loud. Urgent. A kind of force that swept you off your feet whether you were ready or not. What I learned instead is that the real thing feels steady. It feels like someone standing next to you when it would be easier for them to step back. It feels like choosing honesty in a small conference room with fluorescent lights instead of hiding behind convenience. It feels like late-night conversations about reporting structures and family dynamics, not just stolen kisses and comfort. I started this story as a lonely man who thought he just needed warmth. After my divorce, I believed something was wrong with me. That I had been too quiet. Too ordinary. Not exciting enough to keep. I shrank myself in that marriage without even realizing it. Leah had done the same in her own way. She had tried to be easier. Younger. Less threatening. Less visible. As if success and confidence were things she needed to apologize for. We both learned something uncomfortable. You cannot shrink yourself into being loved. And you cannot build something real on half-truths. Loving her meant facing consequences. It meant sitting in rooms where people questioned our motives. It meant hearing whispers and deciding not to respond to every one of them. It meant trusting that integrity, over time, speaks louder than gossip. It also meant looking at my own flaws. I had to admit that I began our relationship for the wrong reasons. I had to accept that desire without responsibility can hurt people. Saying I was in love with her wasn't the brave part. Staying was. Choosing transparency was. Choosing her, publicly and consistently, was. People like to say age is just a number. That sounds simple, almost cliché. But what I saw up close is how often women are told their value has an expiration date. How easily rooms shift their attention to someone younger, louder, newer. Leah didn't need to become smaller to stay relevant. She needed someone who refused to treat her like she was fading. And I needed someone who saw that steady isn't the same as boring. That reliability isn't weakness. That being calm in a crisis, both at work and in love, is strength. We didn't win because the gossip stopped. We won because we stopped letting it define us. We didn't win because everything was smooth. We won because when it got hard, neither of us left. If there's anything I would say to the man I was a year before all of this, it would be simple. Speak up sooner. Don't confuse silence with maturity. Don't stay comfortable when something real is asking you to be brave. One small decision can change the direction of your life. For me, it was stepping back into that ballroom and refusing to let someone diminish her. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heroic. It was just a choice. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Your story doesn't end because something did. It doesn't end because you were overlooked. Or replaced. Or told you're too old or too ordinary. It changes the moment you decide to stop shrinking. We didn't find perfect love. We built steady love. And that has been more than enough.